welcome to the Labor Force Podcast. Stories of the working class in a time of renewed labor militancy and awareness that capitalism is a rotten deal. I'm your host, Mike Strugan, proud member of New York State United Teachers. Greetings all. First up, we had a major step toward putting resources toward unionization. As Republican policies, union-busting corporations, and the imminent threat of AI put unprecedented pressure on the U.S. workforce, Senator Bernie Sanders headlined last Sunday's launch of a movement to strengthen the labor movement and expand worker power across the country. Sanders spoke at the Union Now Building the Labor Movement rally at Terminal 5 in Hell's Kitchen in Midtown Manhattan, alongside New York City Mayor Zohran Mamdani, Association of Flight Attendants CWA International President Sarah Nelson, and other labor and social movement leaders.
My name is Sarah Nelson, and I'm president of the Association of Flight Attendants CWA and a union flight attendant for 30 years. But we will never get the things that we really need unless the working class has more unions. Our fight is the same as the entire working class, and ever since Ronald Reagan fired the air traffic controllers in 1981, unions have been on the decline. Removing the one check we all have on corporate greed. They've stolen our money and they've stolen our time. They've pushed us out of our homes into medical debt and attacked the right to an education. We all have a favorite teacher, and yet billionaires vilify teacher unions because they don't want an empowered working class. Income inequality is worse today than it was just before the Great Depression. So picture this. If you stack $100 bills, does anyone in here know what those look like? If you stack them high enough to reach one of our flights at 35,000 feet, that's 7 miles in the air, that would only be enough $100 bills to equal 3% of Elon Musk's wealth. These oligarchs are close to choking out our democracy, and they seem to answer to no one. But that isn't true. They answer to the workers at Tesla, SpaceX, Amazon, Whole Foods, REI, Wells Fargo, Starbucks, Google, and Delta Airlines when workers form their unions. None of our unions would change the economy alone, even as we hold them accountable one contract at a time. 70% of workers want a union, but barely 10% have one. Union Now wants to change that and bring the politics to the people and get the billionaires out.
And thank you to each and every one of you, the organizers, the activists, the hardworking men and women of labor, for how hard you work every single day, and for the vision of a better New York City that you have built and sustained day after day, week after week, year after year. The city is many things. It is the global capital of business and technology. It is the home of the best pizza in the world, the best music in the world, the best theater in the world. But above all else, New York City is a union town. I want you to say it with me. New York City is a union town. There is no New York City without unions. Across the world, when people think of our city, they think of greatness. And when they think of that greatness, whether they know it or not, they are thinking of the power of organized labor. When they think of towering engineering marvels like the Empire State Building, they are thinking of the union steelworkers and bricklayers that built it into the clouds. When they fly halfway across the world to see a Broadway show, they benefit from unionized flight attendants, baggage handlers, and airport cleaners at JFK and LaGuardia, union hospitality workers at our hotels, and union actors and union stagehands that make magic happen on that
stage. We must stop believing that we are powerless. stop believing that it is okay, it's kind of natural for Elon Musk and a handful of other multi-billionaires who are extremely greedy, for them to shape the future of humanity. We do not give them the right to do that. One of the goals of the oligarchs and the media that they own is to make ordinary people feel that there is nothing that they can do to shape the future. What the Musks of the world tell people is, we got the money, we got the power, we own the politics, we own the media. What are you going to do about it? You ain't got nothing. We got it all. Forget about it. And what we are here today to say to Mr. Musk and his friends, go to hell. We have the power. And that is why, and what this meeting is about, and what Sarah and all of you are trying to do, is we've got to get out and organize, bring people into the movement in a way that we've never ever done.
From the website unionnow.org. At the height of union power in America in the 1950s, 1 in 3 workers was a member of a union. Today, that figure is less than 1 in 10. The long decline of union density over the past half-century has eroded our shared prosperity and led directly to our country's high economic inequality and political instability. In order to restore public faith in our democracy, create an economy for all, and rebalance political power, it's critical to raise union density. The challenges of the current political environment make this task both more difficult and more important. Employers delay elections, illegally fire workers, close plants, or pay such little wages that workers have to work all the time rather than organize. Unions acting on their own lack the resources to win the large, difficult campaigns that are necessary. Increasing union density means organizing millions of new workers. It will require a place where many unions can meet and deploy resources in a coordinated way. Union Now, a nonprofit organization, plans to help solve these issues with 2 primary functions. Raise money to directly support workers who are organizing and striking. We will never revive worker power without enabling more of both of these challenging, expensive actions. Support ambitious campaigns that require shared resources and solidarity. The most important organizing efforts against the largest companies cannot be won by any single union. We will build a network of unions to support one another financially, strategically, and on the ground. Both of the functions of Union Now are critical to the future of the labor movement. Though there are many good pro-worker organizations in America, there's no centralized fund to take in outside donations to support union organizing. And strategic coordination is necessary to effectively challenge the power of the biggest employers. Polls tell us that unions today are more popular than they've been in 60 years. Tens of millions of Americans, 70% of workers, would like to join a union. Barely 10% have one. Union Now seeks to change that to bring politics to the people and out of the hands of billionaires. So you can donate to the cause and see more once again at unionnow.org. Now the headlines will tell you we're in a geopolitical conflict, but on the ground, in the U.S., this is an economic story. And more specifically, it's a story about who pays. The war with Iran has already driven up energy costs. Gas prices pushing past $4 a gallon, diesel even higher. And that ripple effect is hitting everything from groceries to transportation to rent. Because here's the reality. Energy isn't just one sector. It's baked into every sector. When oil spikes, food costs rise because fertilizer and shipping get more expensive. Manufacturing costs go up because plastics and materials are tied to petroleum. Suddenly, the entire economy feels like it's tightening. And that's exactly what we're seeing. Businesses are pulling back, slowing hiring, delaying investment, taking a wait-and-see approach. But notice the contradiction. Prices are rising while growth is slowing. That's not just inflation, that's the early signs of stagflation. And historically, stagflation hits working people the hardest. Because wages, they're not keeping up. Jobs becoming more unstable. And the safety net still shredded. So while policymakers frame this as a strategic conflict overseas, the economic battlefield is right here at home. in the wallets of workers who didn't start this war but are absolutely paying for it. Now, here's where things get uncomfortable, because while households are feeling squeezed, corporate America is thriving. Even as the war drives up costs and uncertainty, corporate profits have remained strong. That's not an accident, it's a pattern. Companies are passing rising costs on to consumers, protecting margins, and in some cases, even expanding them. And we've seen this before. Crisis hits, whether it's a pandemic, inflation, or now war, and corporations use that moment to raise prices beyond their actual cost increases. It's not just cost pass-through, it's opportunistic pricing. Meanwhile, workers are told to tighten their belts. And here's the deeper issue. This disconnect exposes who the economy is actually designed to serve. Because if profits can stay high during a war-driven economic shock, that means the pain is being redistributed downward. Workers absorb higher prices, consumers take on more debt, families cut back. But shareholders, they're still seeing returns. Even the stock market tells the story, rallying on the mere possibility that the war might end, hitting record highs as investors bet on stability returning. So let's be clear, this is not an economy in crisis for everyone. It's an economy where the crisis is selectively experienced, and working people are the ones carrying it. And maybe the most important piece of this whole story is psychological, because the public can feel it. Even if the macro numbers don't scream recession, people are increasingly negative about the economy. And that disconnect between what experts say and what people feel isn't confusion, it's awareness. Because people experience the economy through prices, not GDP. They see higher gas bills, more expensive groceries, rent that keeps climbing. And at the same time, they hear that the economy is resilient or holding up. That gap breeds distrust, and rightfully so. We're now in a moment where consumer sentiment is weakening, especially among lower-income households who are relying more on credit and even food banks to get by. So when people say they hate the economy, what they're really saying is this: they don't feel like it's working for them. And that's the real takeaway from all of this. Not just the war, not just inflation, not just profits. It's that the system is revealing itself, as usual. Because in a moment of global crisis, you can clearly see the priorities: stability for markets, protection for profits, and pressure, constant unrelenting pressure on the rest of us. Let's shake it off with some strike resolutions, including a last-minute deal for Los Angeles school employees. More than 30,000, represented by SEI Local 99, secured a landmark contract just hours before a major strike that could have shut down the LAUSD system. After more than 2 years without a contract, the union, representing low-wage workers like cafeteria staff and janitors, held firm even as other unions settled, demanding better hours, job security, and wages. With pressure mounting and a strike imminent, Mayor Karen Bass intervened and was deeply affected by workers' testimonies. As Union President Conrado Guerrero noted, quote, "She was really shaken by a lot of the stories." Initially, the school district refused to use its $5 billion reserve fund, but under intense pressure, including the threat of solidarity strikes from teachers and administrators, a deal was reached just hours before the walkout. The agreement includes a 24% pay raise over 3 years, guaranteed minimum hours, protections from layoffs, and health care benefits funded largely from reserves. Reflecting on the victory, union leaders emphasized persistence and militancy, with one stating, quote, "We kept shaking the tree and hundreds of millions of dollars fell out." The success was also attributed to years of organizing, member education, and a shift in strategy toward demanding a living wage based on cost of living rather than employer-set comparisons. As SEIU 99's executive director Max Arias explained, quote, "We are not debating within their own budget because they can manipulate the budget." Crucially, solidarity across unions and increased transparency empowered rank-and-file members, ensuring they understood and drove the fight. Ultimately, the workers called the school district's bluff and they won, demonstrating the power of collective action and unified labor strategy. Here's Arias talking with Payday Report about more of the union strategy.
You just reached a landmark tentative agreement yesterday. We were there at the Union Hall. You guys were bargaining all day. What was unique about your bargaining approach? I mean, I heard that you guys set an economic figure and just didn't really budge on it.
Yeah, what we do is first we don't, what traditionally labor does is kind of compare the positions that member working with equivalent positions. So we stop doing that. We compare with the cost of living. That's the starters. Then we have to analyze what they need to get, in our case, out of the poverty line, right? So that's the next thing we have to do. Then after that, we have to analyze the finances of the employer, in this case, the district, to understand how much pressure we can put, how much money, what is doable. At the same time, though, there's an element of it that is we are not debating with them their own budget because they can manipulate their budget. So we don't engage in, where do we find 6 million here, like that, those little things, because it's manipulable. Like their $5 billion that they have, they don't talk about it, but they're the ones that set the accounts, even though they say that it's being used. So then, that being said, we set an amount. And all of this has really been done based on an extensive surveying of our members to the labor management meetings to achieve what are the demands. And so that's how we came to understand the systemic oppression, how it was occurring. And so that led us to start 3 cycles ago, starting to tackle that. The most important was the hours of work continuously being decimated, et cetera. And so that then leads to us setting, in this case, last contract cycle in 26, we started a rumor mill with our members around 30%. We knew we could achieve it, but you don't want to put it out there publicly when you don't know you can't win it. But by the time we were done, we were ready to strike in 26. Everybody understood it was 30%, so we put it out there. And once you do that, and you have a powerful strike, you can't budge.
Yeah, because you really engage the membership.
That's it. The membership knew what they were fighting for. It was the largest education strike in the history of the country. The teachers joined us in sympathy, which is not something you hear of, which is about to happen again, almost the day we would have been. Our striking teachers and principals in sympathy. And so setting that needs, I think, clarity of fight. This time we had a slightly different approach in that the clarity of fight was around the hours of work. And our members, just a lot of education, understanding that that's how they're being held down. They're not getting paid every hour, or the hours can be cut easily because it's a weak contract language. And there's many reasons why their positions are constantly cut. So we had to stabilize that, and that was the rallying cry. And then the 24%, that had been the rumor mill the whole time. And it was about to be put into public. But the way this time worked, because the superintendent's changed along the way, so he's different than what we were prepared to.
When did the superintendent?
Is a few months ago, Superintendent Carvalho was investigated. The FBI raided his home, so he was placed on leave. So he's placed on paid leave, and the acting superintendent shy. So since he's different, we have to do things differently. But he's a more conciliatory approach person, and he had a tough work to do. So we understood that to achieve the change we probably had to strike. So we had that clarity, and our members had that clarity that they were going to open ended strike. And so that's how we bargain. And then this time again, we put it, and then we kind of like push to get it. And at the end, give the last push. But it's important for workers to have clarity. And in this type of bargaining, sitting in a table endlessly with the boss, manipulating numbers over the same amount of money, which is what a lot of bargaining happens. For example, the boss says, I have $80 million, right? And this is what I propose. So a lot of bargaining then is, no, okay, 80 million, we want to change how we spend the 80 million. And we need to bargain over the pot being big enough to achieve it. And that's how we bargain.
And let me ask another question. You said, they have $5 billion. So obviously they always had the money to dip into the reserve fund.
Yes.
It was a question of political will.
Yes, it is. It's exactly that. What they say we have a structural deficit is they are spending more than they receive, but they have the $5 billion surplus. Furthermore, when you ask them what are you spending on, you start analyzing. They have enough because they're spending over $1 billion in contracting out. That money in the public sector, contracting out is more expensive. I know that
$1 billion per year.
Yeah, about $1 billion or more per year.
Money that should be spent on schools.
It should be spent on schools. So what they do is the $300 million contract with a bus company. And the people operating the buses are mainly the school employees. That bus company just kind of... So when you analyze that and we start working towards that and changing that dynamic, then that money can be invested into workers.
So what, they need to come up with $65 million to this raise? What was the number?
The full amount, I think, was about 400 and ongoing. Over $400 million was ongoing, and also the hours of work. And the main reason is the divestment. So to catch up, like our members with the wages, when we saw the wages so low, when this process started, they were at $22,000. If we really we need to support these workers, we had to figure out how to really get them out of the hole. So in the last 9 years, they've had over a 63% wage increase, but only because they were willing to strike and understood their power.
And workers at one of the nation's largest meatpacking plants in Greeley, Colorado reached a deal with JBS USA after a 3-week strike led by UFC Local 7, which had pushed for higher wages and better health care. The agreement includes wage increases over the next 2 years, a $750 one-time bonus, company-paid personal protective equipment, and protections against rising health care costs, and the union described it as a contract with all gains, countless improvements, and not a single concession. Union President Kim Cordova emphasized the significance of the victory, saying workers endured harsh conditions on the picket line because they knew their worth and refused to be disrespected. Today, that sacrifice has been rewarded, adding, quote, "This is what union power looks like." Then there's basic bodily functions. The union is now pushing Colorado lawmakers to pass legislation guaranteeing bathroom access on the job. Cordova said the proposed law would require large meatpacking employers to provide reasonable bathroom breaks without fear of punitive measures, and would ensure workers no longer have to negotiate such basic conditions in future contracts. The union argues this step is necessary despite existing workplace safety rules, with Cordova stating, quote, "JBS should be ashamed of themselves that we have to introduce legislation to enforce OSHA regulations." JBS, however, maintains that it already provides access, saying, quote, "No team member should ever be denied reasonable access to the restroom," and pointing to long-standing policies that allow workers to leave the line for necessary breaks. You be the judge on which one there's telling the truth. Now, it has to be pointed out, around 3,800 to 4,000 workers at the plant are immigrants from countries like Haiti, Somalia, Mexico, and Myanmar. So obviously that tells you something about our economy and way of life. That being said, a new report highlighted by WAMC Northeast Public Radio finds that mass deportation policies could have sweeping economic consequences here in New York, potentially reducing the state's workforce by as much as 14%. The study, conducted by the Rockefeller Institute of Government, emphasizes how heavily key industries rely on immigrant labor, noting that 20% of all construction workers are non-citizens and subject to deportation, while agriculture depends on immigrant workers for 40 to 50% of its workforce, along with significant shares in transportation, manufacturing, and direct care services. Report author and senior fellow at the Rockefeller Institute, Scott Fain, explains that removing these workers would reshape the economy, raising average family costs by about $2,100 and increasing inflation by roughly 3.1%, while creating labor shortages that cannot be easily filled. He also stresses the broader demographic and regional impact, pointing out that immigrant resettlement has helped revitalize upstate cities like Buffalo and Utica, with local leaders effectively saying, "Send us more immigrants." Overall, the report argues that mass deportations would not only disrupt industries, but also weaken population growth, strain communities, and fundamentally alter the state's economic structure. So what this moment exposes, plainly, is that immigrant labor isn't peripheral to the American economy, it is structural. When thousands of the workers sustaining one of the nation's largest meatpacking facilities are immigrants, it underscores a deeper truth. Entire supply chains, from food production to distribution, are built on their labor. And if removing immigrant workers can shrink New York's workforce by up to 14%, drive up costs for families, and fuel inflation, then these workers are not easily replaceable inputs. They're embedded in the functioning of everyday life. Construction, agriculture, care work, transportation, these are not marginal sectors. They're the backbone of how people live, eat, travel, and survive. Mass deportation, then, isn't just an immigration policy, it's an economic shock policy. It threatens to destabilize industries already reliant on tight labor margins, hollow out regional revitalization efforts, and unravel the very conditions that make victories like the JBS contract possible. The contradiction is stark. The same system that depends on immigrant labor to function is simultaneously willing to remove it at scale. The takeaway is unavoidable. Immigrant labor is not just a part of the American way of life, it is a precondition for it. And policies that aim to strip it away are not just punitive, they're economically self-destructive. And on to another sector of the economy that is far too expensive, and as this story illustrates, needlessly, stupidly complex. You guessed it, healthcare. Staying here in New York, but with definite echoes nationwide, roughly 450,000 New Yorkers are expected to lose their free or low-cost health insurance this summer, as changes to federal funding force the state to scale back its Essential Plan, a program that currently covers about 1.7 million residents. The cuts primarily affect people earning between 200% and 250% of the federal poverty level, who had been newly eligible after a recent expansion but will become ineligible starting July 1st, after federal funding cuts last year. These are often small business employees, gig workers, part-timers, and others without coverage. State officials were able to preserve coverage for about 1.3 million residents by restructuring the program, but that decision leaves hundreds of thousands facing a coverage cliff, with many now forced to seek more expensive private plans or employer-based insurance. Lawmakers and advocates are now scrambling to respond, proposing state-funded solutions to maintain coverage or provide subsidies, though the cost, potentially billions of dollars, has made agreement difficult. Some officials warn the situation is serious, with one noting, quote, "We know enough to know that it's bad," while others emphasize the uncertainty around how many people will ultimately become uninsured, since some may transition to other plans at higher costs. Quote, "People say it's the federal government's fault," Community Service Society of New York Vice President of Health Initiatives Elizabeth Benjamin said. "It doesn't really matter to these people. They just know they're losing coverage." So for fuck's sake, another round of let's reshuffle who gets care and who doesn't, instead of fixing the actual problem. Nearly 500,000 people are about to lose coverage, and the big debate is whether the state can scrape together enough money to patch the hole for a little while longer. We'll call it a coverage cliff, hold a few hearings, maybe invent a temporary subsidy, and then act surprised when the same crisis shows up again next year. Meanwhile, the obvious solution just sits there, untouched. A universal healthcare system where your access to care doesn't disappear because a funding formula changed or your income nudged a few dollars too high. Instead of these bureaucratic musical chairs where people bounce between plans, premiums, and panic, we could just guarantee coverage and be done with it. But no, much better to keep reinventing the emergency. Keeps things exciting, doesn't it? In another sour update, Apple announced it will close its store at Towson Town Center in Maryland, one of 3 U.S. locations shutting down, citing the departure of several retailers and declining conditions at the mall. The Towson store is especially significant because it was the first unionized Apple retail location in the country, having organized with the IAM in 2022, making the decision controversial among labor advocates. The union responded strongly, saying it is outraged by the closure and highlighting the store's historic role in organizing within the company. Apple, meanwhile, framed the move as part of a broader strategy to evaluate locations and continue serving customers through nearby stores and online platforms, stating it had made the difficult decision after assessing changing conditions in the mall. And back to the fights, because as we well know, there's always one somewhere, and this is a big one. The UAW is signaling that its next major organizing target could be again the Mercedes-Benz plant in Tuscaloosa, Alabama, as it looks to build on recent momentum from union victories in the South. Following a breakthrough contract with Volkswagen workers in Tennessee, UAW President Shawn Fain emphasized, quote, "The VW workers are leading the way for the entire labor movement and non-union auto workers everywhere," framing the win as a springboard for organizing tens of thousands of non-union workers across the country. Although the union lost the 2024 election at the Mercedes plant, it is now eligible to try again after a required waiting period and appears ready to renew its efforts. The push is bolstered by new momentum, recent wage gains secured through union contracts, and a settlement with federal labor regulators that requires Mercedes to inform workers of their organizing rights and avoid threatening plant closures. Mercedes, however, continues to reject accusations of anti-union behavior, stating that it has not interfered with or retaliated against any team member, and that it strongly refutes the allegations. The Alabama plant is clearly a key battleground in the UAW's broader campaign to expand unionization across non-union auto plants in the South, where more success could reshape labor dynamics in the industry. So again, you can feel something shifting in the economy right now. And not in the abstract, not in some distant projection about the future, but right at the front door of work itself. Because if you want to understand what AI is actually doing to the labor market, don't start with CEOs or tech hype cycles. Start with college graduates. Start with the people who are supposed to be stepping onto the first rung of the ladder and realizing that rung is cracking beneath them. Recent reporting shows that more than 42% of recent college graduates are underemployed. That's not just a bad number. That's not just a cyclical downturn. That's a structural signal that something deeper is breaking. These are people who did everything they were told to do, got degrees, took on debts, built resumes, and they're still locked out, sending out dozens, sometimes hundreds of applications, only to be filtered out by automated systems before a human being ever sees their name. And here's where it becomes almost absurd. So-called entry-level jobs now routinely require 3 to 5 years of experience. Think about what that actually means. The economy is no longer even pretending to function as a training system. Employers want fully formed workers, plug-and-play labor, with none of the investment required to create them. The cost of training, of development, of risk, that's been offloaded entirely onto workers themselves. And now AI is accelerating that trend. Because what AI offers employers isn't just efficiency, it offers leverage. It allows companies to do more with fewer people, yes, but more importantly, it allows them to demand more from the people who remain. Higher productivity, broader skill sets, faster output, all while shrinking the number of actual opportunities available. And that's where economist Mark Zandi comes in. He's warning that we're approaching a tipping point, a moment where companies don't just experiment with AI, but fully commit to replacing workers because the market rewards them for it. We've already seen the early version of that. Companies announce layoffs and their stock prices rise. Investors interpret job cuts as discipline, as efficiency, as a signal that management is serious about margins. And that creates a feedback loop. Cut labor, boost profits, get rewarded, then do it again. That's not a technological inevitability, that's a policy and incentive choice. And at first, it doesn't look like mass unemployment. That's what makes this moment harder to recognize. Instead, it shows up as something quieter but just as damaging. Hiring freezes, shrinking entry-level pipelines, fewer internships, fewer chances to get a foot in the door at all. It's not that jobs are vanishing overnight, it's that access to jobs is being systematically choked off. Looking more broadly, you start to see how dangerous that really is. Because entry-level work isn't just about income, it's about mobility. It's about skill building, socialization into the workforce, and the ability to move up over time. If that layer collapses, the entire structure above it becomes unstable. You can't have experienced workers without inexperienced workers first getting a chance. What we're looking at is the slow erosion of the labor pipeline itself. And then there's the human cost, the part that doesn't show up cleanly in statistics. There's a story making the rounds about a former Google employee who did everything right. Delayed life, worked longer hours, sacrificed relationships, balanced stability, all in the name of career advancement. And still, when the cuts came, none of that mattered. The job was gone. He was laid off. That story resonates because it punctures one of the core myths of modern work, that loyalty and sacrifice will be reciprocated. For decades, workers have been told a very specific story. Invest in yourself, commit to your employer, and you'll be rewarded with stability, security, and upward mobility. But what AI and the broader restructuring of the economy are revealing is that this was never a guarantee. It was a conditional promise, and those conditions are disappearing. Because in a system increasingly driven by short-term returns and shareholder expectations, workers are not long-term investments, they're variable costs, and AI makes those costs easier to cut. Now, it's important to be clear about something. This isn't the first time technology has disrupted work. Automation has been reshaping labor markets for centuries. But there's a critical difference at this moment. Historically, job destruction and job creation happened in tandem, and crucially, over a longer time horizon. Workers had time to adapt, retrain, shift industries. New sectors emerged that absorbed displaced labor. What we're seeing now is acceleration without absorption. Jobs are being restructured or eliminated faster than new stable pathways are being created. And the jobs that do emerge often require higher levels of specialization, more credentials, or are themselves unstable. Contract work, gig work, precarious employment without benefits or long-term security. Even when AI doesn't fully replace a worker, it reshapes the job in ways that often degrade it. Tasks get automated, roles get fragmented, expectations increase, and wages don't necessarily follow. Skilled work becomes semi-skilled. Semi-skilled work becomes low-paid, and low-paid work becomes disposable. And the long-term data on displacement is clear. Workers who lose jobs to technological change don't just bounce back. Many take years to recover, if they recover at all, and often end up earning less than they did before. So when people ask, will AI take jobs? That's actually the wrong question. The better question is, what kind of labor market is AI helping to build? Is it one where productivity gains are shared, where workers benefit from efficiency, where technology reduces working hours and improves quality of life? Or is it one where those gains are concentrated at the top, while access to stable, meaningful work becomes narrower, more competitive, and more precarious? Because right now, the evidence is pointing in a very specific direction. A labor market where fewer workers are needed, where entry is harder, where expectations are higher, and where the rewards are increasingly disconnected from the effort required to earn them. And if that trend continues, if young workers can't get in, build experience, can't find stability, then this stops being just a labor issue. It becomes a societal one. Because work is still the primary way people access income, healthcare, housing, and dignity. It's the foundation that everything else is built on. And when that foundation starts to crack, when the pathway into it starts to disappear, you don't just get economic anxiety, you get political instability, social fragmentation, a growing sense that the system itself isn't fucking working. And maybe that's the clearest way to understand this moment. This isn't just a technological shift. It's a restructuring of power in the labor market, happening in real time and accelerating faster than most people are prepared to confront. Adding to all this, as The Guardian reports, there's a growing disconnect between how employers and workers experience AI in the workplace, with many employees arguing that it's creating more problems than it solves. While executives overwhelmingly claim AI improves efficiency, one survey found 92% believe it boosts productivity. Only about 40% of non-managers agree, reflecting a sharp divide in perception. Workers report being forced to use AI tools to generate what some call work slop, or content that appears polished but is riddled with errors and requires significant correction, ultimately increasing workloads rather than reducing them. As one worker explains clearly, it's just more work, highlighting how AI often shifts labor from creation to editing and troubleshooting. The article also notes that companies driven by heavy investments in AI are cutting jobs while expecting remaining employees to rely on these imperfect systems without sufficient training or support. Across industries, from healthcare to design, this has led to frustration, declining morale, and questions about whether AI's promised productivity gains are overstated, with critics arguing the technology is being deployed as a one-size-fits-all solution despite limited evidence of real efficiency improvements. All right, let's close with the American dream and how it now comes in a slightly dented, partially inflated, above-ground version. Because apparently in 2026, the big lifestyle upgrade isn't a house, or retirement, or God forbid, financial stability. No, it's a pool. But not just any pool, an above-ground pool. That's right, the backyard status symbol of things are going great, please don't look at my bank account. According to a recent report, above-ground pools are shedding their stigma, which is amazing, because nothing says economic progress like collectively deciding that what used to be considered the budget option is now aspirational. And look, the spin here is incredible. These aren't cheap anymore. They're accessible luxury. They're elevated backyard experiences. They're integrated into outdoor living spaces, which is a very elegant way of saying you can't afford the thing you actually wanted. Because here's the reality check. Installing an in-ground pool now runs north of 50 grand, sometimes way higher. That's not a pool. That's a second mortgage with chlorine. Meanwhile, the above-ground pools come in somewhere around 7 grand to 14 grand, which in today's economy qualifies as basically free as long as you don't think too hard about it. And that's the trick, right? The rebrand. We didn't solve the affordability crisis, we just redesigned it. We added composite decking. We threw in some warm, natural tones. Maybe a quarter-wrap deck so it looks less like a financial compromise and more like a lifestyle choice. Because nothing screams I'm thriving like strategically landscaping around the fact that you had to Google pool options under crushing economic pressure. But hey, we're told these pools can elevate the appearance of a backyard. Of course they can. When your expectations have been lowered far enough, everything looks elevated. And to be fair, the technology really has improved. These things can now mimic in-ground pools, last 20 years, even be installed on slopes, which is great. Because if the economy keeps going the way it is, a slope might be the only property you can afford anyway. But this isn't really about pools. This is about how the definition of luxury keeps shrinking. First it was smaller homes. Then it was renting forever. Now it's congratulations, you've unlocked the premium experience of swimming in something that sits on top of your yard instead of inside it. We are quite literally living above ground because going below ground is too expensive. And the most telling quote in all of this, One expert says you can have a high-end pool for the cost of one vacation. Right, a vacation. Remember those? Those things people used to take when wages kept up with productivity? So now the choice is simple. You can either leave your house or fill your backyard with water and pretend you did. Progress. And honestly, that might be the most honest part of this whole story, because at this point, the goal isn't luxury, it's simulation. It's creating just enough of the feeling of prosperity to distract from the fact that the real thing is increasingly out of reach. So enjoy your above-ground pool. Seriously, no judgment. Just don't forget, the only thing that's really sunk here is the standard of living. Well, that does it for this episode. If you like what you hear, give a rate or review on your favorite podcast app to help me grow. I'm proud to be part of the Labor Radio Podcast Network, with over 200 labor shows you can check out at laborradionetwork.org. This has been the Labor Force Podcast. I'm Mike Strukin. Solidarity, always.